Animal agriculture is a leading cause of the climate crisis.
You can't just rescue animals whenever you want, or feed them, or disrupt efforts to control invasive species, unless you're a professional with strong reasoning. We're tired of seeing animals labeled as nuisances or inconveniences. If you're driven by emotions rather than knowledge, you might cause more harm than good. I've seen this firsthand while researching today's topic. Oh, and by the way, if you're the type to forget, go ahead and like the video now. Back in 1997, the National Wildlife Institute, in collaboration with the University of Turin, devised a strategy to eradicate gray squirrels in Italy, aiming to protect native species from the invasive threat. Everything seemed set, but animal rights activists challenged the plan in court, stalling the project. A lengthy legal battle followed, and although scientists ultimately won in 2000, it was too late. During the 3-year delay, the squirrel population had spread significantly, making their removal nearly impossible. Experts now predict gray squirrels will likely spread across Eurasia, and we missed the window to stop them when it was still feasible. Biologists may seem harsh, but they understand that invasive species pose a genuine danger to biodiversity that tackle invasions. Scientists often advocate for the total eradication of invasive species, even when those species seem small, cute, and harmless. Despite their appearance, gray squirrels are among the most aggressive invasive species in the world. Originally introduced from North America about 140 years ago, these squirrels have now taken over significant parts of the UK, endangering the native red squirrel population. In northwestern Italy alone, gray squirrels have spread across nearly 770 square miles. Unfortunately, attempts to stop this spread were thwarted by animal rights groups. Now, these invaders are poised to cross into France and Switzerland, threatening native squirrels in those areas as well. The invasion began in 1948 when 2 pairs of gray squirrels were brought to Piedmont from Washington, D.C., and released in Stupinigi, Turin province, their first appearance in mainland Europe. Additional releases occurred in 1966 with 5 squirrels brought from Virginia to Villa Gripola in Genoa, and again in 1994, though attempts were made to remove the latter group in 1996. However, it was too late. By then, the squirrels had begun breeding rapidly. Gray squirrels stand out because they can establish new populations with just a few individuals. In fact, studies show that in 71.4% of successful releases, only 10 squirrels were needed to start a stable population capable of expanding and outcompeting native species. These creatures are highly adaptable and can cause widespread damage. Between 1970 and 2010, the red squirrel population in Italy decreased by 62%, equivalent to about 652 square miles of lost habitat, while the gray squirrels took over. Initially, their spread was slow, but it doubled in speed over time, as is often the case with invasive species that excel at adjusting to new environments. The gray squirrel has successfully adapted to the diverse climates and habitats of both northern and southern Europe, creating a significant threat to the survival of the red squirrel, which is already endangered in Europe. Unfortunately, the situation continues to worsen, with economic consequences adding to the environmental impact. In the UK, gray squirrels are inflicting substantial damage on forests and commercial woodlands. They have a destructive habit of stripping bark from trees, leaving them vulnerable to insects and fungi, which ultimately reduces the quality of the wood, particularly hardwood. The impact isn't just ecological. Native red squirrels are also severely affected. Invasive gray squirrels outcompete them for food, creating a struggle for survival. This competition leads to red squirrels becoming smaller, failing to gain enough weight, reproducing less, and ultimately facing population decline. They are essentially left with no other options. But the competition for food is only part of the problem. A much more serious issue is the spread of the squirrel pox virus. Gray squirrels act as carriers of this virus without suffering any symptoms, but when it spreads to native red squirrels, it often proves deadly. This double threat, food competition and disease, has made it increasingly difficult for red squirrels to survive where gray squirrels have invaded. Sadly, red squirrels aren't so fortunate when it comes to the squirrel pox virus. Infected red squirrels develop painful scabs on their faces, paws, and genitalia, and the disease is so fast-acting that it kills its host shortly after infection. As a result, it's rare to even spot a sick red squirrel. You either find them healthy or already dead. But that's not the only issue gray squirrels bring. They also raid the nests of local birds, sometimes eating bird eggs and even chicks if the opportunity arises. Since it's too late to fully eradicate gray squirrels, our best course of action is to predict their future spread. Currently, the gray areas on the map show where gray squirrels dominate. Red represents the native red squirrel regions, and orange highlights the territories where their ranges overlap. In an optimistic scenario, gray squirrels might reach the Western Alps between 2026 and 2036, France between 2066 and 2071, and Switzerland by 2051 to 2066. But if things go south, they could arrive even sooner, much like what happened on the British Isles. The outlook for Italy and the rest of continental Europe isn't promising. Since gray squirrels have already multiplied significantly, culling efforts are ineffective. Even if you manage to reclaim territory from them, it's a temporary victory. These creatures breed quickly and will soon repopulate areas you thought were cleared. To stop them as past. Animal rights activists, driven by good intentions, sometimes end up with unintended consequences. For instance, on May 8, 2015, a group of activists entered a Chinese restaurant in Dublin, freed lobsters from a tank, and later released them into the sea off Clontarf. They believed they were saving the lobsters from being eaten, but the broader implications of such actions are often overlooked. The unfortunate reality is that the lobsters released by the activists in Dublin likely didn't survive. You can't simply release an animal into an unfamiliar environment and expect it to thrive. Most of the time, these animals die because they're not adapted to their new surroundings. Lobsters, for instance, are native to warmer, tropical waters like the Caribbean Sea. Dublin's chilly Irish Sea is far from ideal for them, presenting too harsh a climate. Plus, they'd face unfamiliar predators, prey, and even diseases they're unequipped to handle. In all likelihood, these lobsters met a quicker death in the wild than they would have if they'd been served on a plate. That if by some chance the lobsters did survive, it means another problem was created. The activists may have introduced an alien species into an environment where it doesn't belong. This almost always leads to negative consequences, as we've seen with invasive species around the world. Once again, despite good intentions, more harm than good was done. That here's another important aspect to consider. Many crustaceans, like shrimp, lobsters, and crabs, can reproduce without mating. This is a big deal, especially when such species are introduced in new environments. Take the marbled crayfish, for example. In 1995, a biology student bought some of these crayfish from American sellers at a pet fair in Frankfurt, thinking they were Texas crayfish. However, the crayfish started multiplying rapidly. Unable to manage them, the student eventually abandoned the idea of keeping them. This kind of situation can lead to invasive species spreading uncontrollably, creating major environmental issues. After the biology student gave the marbled crayfish to friends, they ended up releasing them into rivers, lakes, and even flushing them down toilets. This marked the beginning of a serious invasion, particularly in Germany, across much of mainland Europe, and most strikingly, on the island of Madagascar. Madagascar's freshwater ecosystems are highly unique, but also extremely fragile, making the introduction of invasive species like the marbled crayfish a major threat. When scientists first discovered this crayfish invasion, they were shocked. These creatures have an unusual method of reproduction. They essentially clone themselves. Like cancer cells multiplying from a single cell, marbled crayfish reproduce asexually, meaning that every marbled crayfish in existence today is a direct clone of one original female. Each crayfish reproduces about 4 times a year, and since they don't need males, they don't waste any time or energy searching for mates. One female can create a population of millions of genetically identical offspring, which then multiply at an exponential rate. Germany has even started offering financial rewards for catching marbled crayfish, though the payment is small. Authorities are cautious about raising the bounty, fearing that people might intentionally breed the crayfish to sell them back to the government for profit. The crayfish have become so numerous that in some areas, People can catch about 150 of them in an hour with just a flashlight in their hands, making it easier than picking mushrooms in Madagascar. With a marbled crayfish arrived around 2007, their population now numbers in the millions, putting local species at serious risk. The rapid expansion of this invasive species has the potential to cause long-term damage to the island's delicate ecosystems, which are not equipped to handle such an aggressive, fast-reproducing invader. Crawfish, including the Louisiana variety, have the potential to become a global issue. For example, they're already wreaking havoc on freshwater ecosystems in countries like Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, and Germany, where they are decimating fish populations and other aquatic animals. This is why animal advocates must be cautious when rescuing such species. There's a significant risk that by releasing them into the wild, they could unintentionally introduce harmful invasive species, disrupting local ecosystems. A striking example occurred in 2017, when two activists released hundreds of lobsters and crabs into the sea near Brighton, aiming to free them from being sold and eaten. However, they made a crucial error by failing to verify the species. It turned out the lobsters were American lobsters, considered invasive in the UK. Their release not only broke the law, but also posed a serious threat to the local marine environment. Technically, these two individuals weren't animal rights activists. They were participating in a Buddhist ceremony known as life release, where animals destined for slaughter are set free into the wild. Despite the spiritual motivation, this didn't exempt them from legal consequences. The police fined them over $20,000, and the government spent an additional $23,000 attempting to recapture the invasive lobsters, but only managed to retrieve half of them. The expenses far exceeded the fine, highlighting the unintended consequences of such actions. Ironically, there might be a solution to the invasive crayfish problem, a creature that's invasive itself. Meet the round goby, native to Central Eurasia and the Black and Caspian Seas. Although it's unwelcome in major European rivers due to its threat to local biodiversity, the round goby is a voracious predator, particularly when it comes to marbled crayfish. While these two species haven't encountered each other frequently yet, it's expected that their interactions will become more common in the near future. The round goby's ability to dominate marbled crayfish could potentially offer an unexpected advantage in controlling invasive crustacean populations. Unfortunately, the future remains uncertain regarding the interactions between round gobies and marbled crayfish. It's possible they could reach a balance, but with the gobies having an abundant food source in the form of these rapidly reproducing crayfish, they might simply take over local ecosystems. Only time will tell. The issue isn't just about the inconvenience posed by invasive species. The consequences of unregulated animal populations, often exacerbated by animal rights activism, extend far beyond squirrels and crayfish. In 2003, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources sought to control the growing population of mute swans, but they encountered significant opposition. An animal rights group cited the National Environmental Policy Act, arguing that these invasive birds should be protected rather than culled. Currently, around 13,000 mute swans inhabit the Atlantic Flyway, a critical migratory route stretching from Canada to Florida. While 13,000 might seem like a lot, Maryland's mute swan population alone has ballooned to about 3,600, starting from just 5 individuals. Since their introduction, the population has surged at alarming rates. From 1986 to 1999, the number of mute swans in Rhode Island increased by nearly 80%, and they seem poised to double every 3 to 4 years along the coast. Given the rapid growth and ecological impact, it's clear that action needs to be taken. The resistance to culling by conservation groups is often seen as an act of cruelty towards ecosystems struggling under the weight of invasive populations. Balancing the welfare of native species with the realities of invasive species management is a complex challenge, but one that must be addressed to protect fragile ecosystems. The classification of mute swans as an invasive species in North America is currently being challenged by the advocacy group Save the Mute Swans. Their members argue that these swans are native to the region and, therefore, deserve protection. However, authorities maintain that mute swans are classified as an invasive species and are among the most aggressive waterfowl globally. Locals have expressed concerns about the overwhelming number of swans, while animal rights activists insist that lethal measures are unnecessary and that alternative solutions must be sought. After all, many people admire these graceful white birds. 1:20 p.m., September 21st, 2024, Alex. In 2001, Maryland's legislature passed a law allowing for the lethal control of mute swans, but two activists fought to keep at least 500 of them in the area, despite the swans' rapid reproduction rates. This approach raised eyebrows, as it seemed impractical given the swan population's growth potential. Interestingly, mute swans were intentionally brought to the U.S. from Europe to enhance the beauty of ponds and lakes. People were drawn to these swans, which were highly valued in Europe and often adorned gardens and nobility's private ponds. As American cities began developing in the 1800s, creating parks and ponds became popular, and swans were a natural addition. To prevent them from flying away, people would clip their wings. However, the swans or their descendants quickly became feral due to their rapid breeding, absence of natural predators, and ample suitable habitats. This transformation has led to the current challenges in managing their populations, underscoring the complexities of human interventions in nature. The transformation of decorative park swans into overwhelming populations has created significant issues. People have reported aggressive swan attacks, and it's important to note just how formidable these birds can be. Mute swans are not only causing distress among the public, they're also disrupting local ecosystems. Like many invasive species, they outcompete native waterfowl for resources, consuming vast amounts of aquatic vegetation and behaving aggressively towards other birds. Biologists warn that mute swans can disrupt the natural food chain due to their voracious appetites. Studies have shown a marked decline in aquatic plants, with some species completely disappearing due to swan grazing. Fish that rely on these plants also suffer as a consequence. During mating season, mute swans can claim territories as large as 10 acres, aggressively displacing other species, including local birds that also need space to nest. They can drive away competitors and even kill chicks, making them undesirable neighbors. Amid all this, the desire to protect mute swans can seem misguided. While advocating for animal welfare is important, such efforts should be informed by scientific expertise. There have been successful examples of collaboration between animal rights activists and conservation biologists, such as in Fort Worth, Texas, where a program was implemented to manage feral pigs. In that case, all stakeholders were informed about the damage caused by the pigs, and repeated communications helped ensure understanding. The two groups then worked together to create a humane culling plan, deciding on methods of euthanasia and appropriate disposal of the animals. This partnership was beneficial because they shared a common goal: caring for nature in a responsible way. Balancing animal rights with ecological health is essential for successful conservation efforts.